I met Kobi Snitz back in 2008 when a mutual friend basically said he was going to be in town. He was with Anarchists Against the Wall, and did anyone want to meet him? And I jumped at the opportunity to interview him for my book, which there are copies out there, Refusing to Be Enemies. And we've been in touch on and off since. He's one of my major informants on how things are progressing, particularly with the struggle against the wall and confiscation of Palestinian land for settlements, and the participation of Israelis alongside Palestinians in that struggle, which you're going to hear more about. And so Kobi is also with a group called Boycott from Within, and this is something you don't hear much about. It's Israeli, I guess, is it all Jewish Israelis? Israeli citizens who, from inside Israel, are supporting the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So, without further ado, as they say, here's Kobi.
Thanks, Maxine, and thanks for the other co-sponsors, and thanks for coming out. I want to start with the current negotiations. You hear a lot about them, and you might wonder what are they all about. Well, I think the most common answer you hear in the Israeli press, it's quite openly discussed that the negotiations are about nothing. Here's how Chemi Shalev, Haaretz reporter, described it this last Friday. At least some of the decision makers have returned to the realization that pointless negotiations are also preferable to alternatives in the unknown. The importance is in their mere existence. This is true politically to prevent dismantling the coalition, and also diplomatically to prevent the isolation of Israel. This is, you hear that over and over again. Yossi Werther, another senior commentator in Haaretz, he reports a discussion with members of the Israeli government who attended a meeting with Netanyahu, and this is how they describe the strategy for negotiations or Netanyahu's approach to negotiations, that these officials came away with the impression that the Prime Minister's present frame of mind is to flow with the Americans, to get the documents from the Americans and adopt part of it while objecting to other parts, to maneuver, navigate, and cruise, and hope that the Palestinians will do the work for him. Netanyahu sees no chance for permanent settlement, according to senior figures in the political establishment who speak with him regularly, but at the same time, he is not willing to go down in history as the prime minister under whom Israel found itself in a situation of unprecedented international isolation and became a pariah state. You hear this, and you will hear this again, that the point of the negotiations has nothing to do with reaching an agreement, merely to buy more time and perpetuate the current situation, which allows for further expansion of Israeli facts on the ground. Peter Baynard wrote about his discussion with senior American administrators, American administration officials, who objected to the negotiations on these grounds. They believe that such negotiations would let Netanyahu off the hook. They believe he wants a facade of a peace process because it insulates him from international pressure. By refusing to make that charade possible, Obama officials believe they are forcing Netanyahu to own his rejectionism and letting an angry world take it from there. Again, the discussion is purely about who is going to be left blamed by the Americans at the end of the negotiations. This translates into how much license Israel is going to be given by the Americans, the crucial sponsor of Israeli policies. How much license is Israel going to get to continue current policies? It's very hard to find details about the actual content of the negotiations. That's almost a secondary issue. But when it does come out, it gives you a sense of how meaningful this so-called American pressure that is supposed to be applied to Israel is. Barak Ravid, another commentator in Haaretz, quotes Baynard about the administration officials and their reluctance for the U.S. to sponsor the negotiations. And he comments that the U.S. knows very well that Israel is to blame for the breakdown in negotiations, but publicly it assigns equal blame to Israel and to the Palestinians. This is the extent of the pressure that is actually applied to Israel, regardless of propaganda around this point. Another more significant measure of the pressure that's applied to Israel is to compare what we do know about the parameters of the discussion to what is known, which very much is known about the proposal made by Olmert in 2008, I believe. So the current, the best information that I was able to find, the current negotiations, one of the key issues is presence of the IDF on the eastern border of a possible Palestinian state in the Jordan Valley. This is something that wasn't demanded in the Olmert proposal in 2008. So the Israeli position since 2008 to this point has become more radical, and more demands are being made of Palestinians at this stage of the negotiations. This is the most meaningful indication of what sort of pressure is actually applied to Israel. And the result of this lack of pressure is a perpetuation of the current situation and what it means to Palestinians, and a situation as of today which is considered a relatively peaceful one. There isn't an official war going on. Gaza is not being bombed. And as far as Israel is concerned, this is a peaceful situation. This peaceful situation means that the following kind of incidents are regular occurrence. Take an example from a few weeks ago, the shooting of 14-year-old Yusuf Shawarmeh in South Hebron Hills. He and some of his friends were crossing over the separation barrier that's built on their land to pick some edible plants. They were shot from an ambush by IDF forces, and Yusuf bled to death on the spot. You might wonder what are going to be the ramifications, which is a more indicative point. Soldiers, let's grant that soldiers might have been afraid, that they might have misinterpreted the situation. If we grant all of these things and say that the shooting was not completely deliberate, the crucial question is what happens in the aftermath. And an indication of that is easy to find in earlier cases. On 15 January 2003, 16-year-old Samir Awad was shot also from an ambush in Budus, a very similar situation. Awad and other young men from Budus demonstrated at the wall. They might have crossed it or damaged it. They were not threatening anybody. There's no claim that they were, such as in the previous case. He was also shot to death. Reports have it that he was shot twice. After being injured and trying to escape, he was shot again from close range. Over a year later, the Army Attorney General has not indicted any of the shooters or even announced that they're going to indict or that they're going to drop the case. You'd think that a year would be enough to file an indictment. The clear meaning of this is that there's not going to be an indictment, and the Attorney General doesn't even bother to make the announcement to that effect, and they're just waiting this out. There's, in fact, an Israeli organization whose job who's kept very busy doing exactly these things. Yesh Din, whose job it is to harass the military prosecution and the police into just following up these cases, just investigating the case, filing charges, prosecuting the shooters, etc. It's a full-time occupation for a very busy organization. There's other cases here, but the standard procedure is that for Palestinian shootings, there's almost never an investigation that leads to an indictment. Another case, this is January 23rd, 2013, near Arub refugee camp, a young woman, 21-year-old Lubna El-Hanash, was shot while walking by the road. Again, a year later, no indictments and no announcement about the case being closed. This case is slightly different. There has, in fact, been an arrest related to this case. It's the arrest of an Israeli activist who, during a demonstration in the South Mount Hebron Hills, asked the officer who shot El-Hanash, how does it feel? And he was arrested for insulting a public servant. So it isn't true that there's that the legal system in Israel is not working. It did work in this case. Lastly, another indicative case is that of Arafat Jaradat. He died in custody also. This was February 2013. A young man dies in custody. The Israeli pathologist, the now disgraced Israeli pathologist Yehuda Hiss, led the pathological exam and concluded that this is a natural. The death is caused from natural causes. A young man dies in custody, and the autopsy declares it a natural cause, and so no investigation follows. However, the Association to Stop Torture in Israel invited an independent forensic pathologist to examine the case, and she determined that he suffered torture and that the torture led to his death at Megiddo prison. Again, this is the state of affairs not at the case of an emergency. This is a peaceful period in Israel. These things occur regularly, and the lack of ramification, prosecution, or accountability is more indicative than anything. It indicates a permanent policy and one that needs to be opposed systematically.